Question 1. Market research demonstrates that a significant portion of Great-West Lifeco's existing client base also expresses interest in a new, emerging market segment where a competitor is currently a dominant player. An opportunity arises for Great-West Lifeco to partner with a firm that has a strong, established presence in this new segment, which could lead to substantial new revenue. However, this potential partner also happens to be a direct competitor to one of Great-West Lifeco's largest and most loyal existing clients in their primary business area. How should an employee of Great-West Lifeco, responsible for exploring this partnership, proceed? Option A. Discreetly investigate the potential partner's competitive strategy in the new market segment and subtly guide the existing client towards alternative solutions that do not involve the new market segment, without explicitly mentioning the potential partnership. Option B. Proceed with exploring the partnership opportunity, assuming the existing client will not be negatively impacted and that Great-West Lifeco's primary business with them will remain unaffected. Option C. Initiate discussions with the potential partner immediately to secure the opportunity, and only disclose any potential conflict to the existing client if it becomes unavoidable or directly impacts their current business. Option D. Proactively inform the largest existing client about the potential partnership, explain the nature of the potential conflict of interest, and seek their understanding and consent before proceeding with discussions with the potential partner. Correct answer is D. Proactively inform the largest existing client about the potential partnership, explain the nature of the potential conflict of interest, and seek their understanding and consent before proceeding with discussions with the potential partner. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's desire for competitive advantage with the ethical obligation to maintain client confidentiality and avoid misrepresentation. The pressure to secure new business can lead to overlooking or downplaying potential conflicts of interest. Careful judgment is required to ensure that Great-West Lifeco's actions align with its fiduciary duties and regulatory requirements. The correct approach involves proactively identifying and disclosing the potential conflict of interest to the client, and seeking their informed consent before proceeding. This demonstrates a commitment to transparency and client best interests, which is a cornerstone of ethical conduct in the financial services industry. Specifically, this aligns with the principles of acting with integrity and in the best interests of clients, as expected under general ethical codes and potentially specific regulatory guidance concerning disclosure and conflicts of interest within the relevant jurisdiction for Great-West Lifeco's operation. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the new business opportunity without informing the existing client about the potential conflict. This failure to disclose is a significant ethical breach and could violate regulatory requirements related to transparency and conflict management. It erodes client trust and exposes Great-West Lifeco to reputational damage and potential regulatory sanctions. Another incorrect approach would be to assume the existing client would not be concerned about the new business relationship. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the client's right to be informed about matters that could affect their interests. It is not the responsibility of the employee to make assumptions about client sentiment. Rather, it is to provide them with the necessary information to make their own informed decisions. A further incorrect approach would be to subtly steer the existing client away from the new business opportunity without a direct disclosure of the conflict. This is manipulative and undermines the principle of providing objective advice. It creates a hidden conflict and does not allow the client to make a fully informed choice. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve 1. Identifying potential conflicts of interest. 2. Assessing the nature and severity of the conflict. 3. Consulting internal policies and relevant regulations. 4. Disclosing the conflict to all affected parties. 5. Seeking informed consent or implementing mitigation strategies. 6. Documenting the process and decision. Question 2. The control framework reveals that a long-standing client of Great-West Lifeco, who has consistently invested in conservative, income-generating products, is now requesting a significant allocation to a highly speculative, emerging market cryptocurrency fund. The client states they heard about it from a friend and believes it will provide rapid, substantial returns. As a Great-West Lifeco advisor, what is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Recommend a diversified portfolio that includes a small speculative allocation to the cryptocurrency fund, even if it slightly exceeds the client's stated risk tolerance, to satisfy their request. Option B. Conduct a thorough suitability assessment to determine if the cryptocurrency fund aligns with the client's risk tolerance, financial goals, and investment knowledge, and explain the risks and potential benefits clearly. Option C. Immediately execute the client's request to invest in the cryptocurrency fund, as the client is a long-standing customer and their instructions should be followed. Option D. Advise the client that Great-West Lifeco does not offer such products and suggest they seek advice from a specialized cryptocurrency advisor. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough suitability assessment to determine if the cryptocurrency fund aligns with the client's risk tolerance, financial goals, and investment knowledge, and explain the risks and potential benefits clearly. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's immediate desire for a specific investment product and the advisor's fiduciary duty to recommend suitable investments based on the client's best interests and risk tolerance. The advisor must navigate potential conflicts of interest and ensure compliance with regulatory requirements designed to protect investors. Careful judgment is required to balance client satisfaction with ethical obligations and legal mandates. The correct approach involves prioritizing the client's best interests by conducting a thorough suitability assessment before recommending any product, even if the client expresses a strong preference. This aligns with the principles of fiduciary duty, which requires acting solely in the client's best interest. Specifically, under the regulatory framework governing financial advice in the relevant jurisdiction, assuming a jurisdiction like Canada for Great-West Lifeco, which would align with provincial securities commissions and FINTRAC guidelines. Advisors have a legal and ethical obligation to ensure that any recommendation is suitable for the client. This includes understanding the client's financial situation, investment objectives, risk tolerance, and knowledge of investments. Recommending a product that does not meet these criteria, even at the client's insistence, would be a breach of this duty and could lead to regulatory sanctions. An incorrect approach would be to immediately proceed with the client's requested investment without a suitability assessment. This fails to uphold the fiduciary duty and disregards the regulatory requirement for suitability. Such an action could expose the client to undue risk and Great-West Lifeco to significant reputational damage and regulatory penalties for failing to ensure proper client care and compliance. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the client's request outright without exploring the underlying reasons for their preference. The advisor must ensure suitability. A complete dismissal might alienate the client and miss an opportunity to educate them about potentially more appropriate alternatives, or to understand if their request stems from a misunderstanding or misinformation. This approach lacks client centricity and professional communication. A third incorrect approach would be to recommend a product that is only marginally suitable, but offers higher commissions to the advisor or firm. This represents a conflict of interest where personal gain is prioritized over the client's best interests, a clear violation of ethical standards and potentially specific regulations concerning conflicts of interest and fair dealing. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. 1. Understand the client. Fully assess the client's financial situation, investment objectives, risk tolerance, and knowledge. 2. Evaluate the request. Critically analyze the client's stated preference against their assessed profile. 3. Determine suitability. Identify products that are genuinely suitable and align with the client's best interests. 4. Educate and advise. Clearly explain the rationale behind recommendations, including the pros and cons of various options, and address any client misconceptions. 5. Document everything. Maintain detailed records of all client interactions, assessments, recommendations, and decisions. 6. Escalate if necessary. If a significant discrepancy exists between the client's request and suitability, or if the client insists on an unsuitable recommendation, escalate the matter to a supervisor or compliance department. Question 3. Investigation of a potential new business opportunity for Great-West Lifeco reveals that the primary decision maker at the prospective client company is a close personal friend of the Great-West Lifeco employee responsible for developing the lead. The employee is aware of this relationship and its potential to influence the decision. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Great-West Lifeco employee? Option A. Subtly use the personal relationship during the pitch to build rapport and highlight Great-West Lifeco's understanding of the prospective client's needs. Option B. Disclose the personal relationship to the appropriate compliance or management personnel at Great West Lifeco, and recuse oneself from further involvement in the pitch and decision-making process for this client. Option C. Avoid pursuing the prospective client altogether to prevent any appearance of a conflict of interest without informing management. Option D. Proceed with the pitch as planned, believing the personal relationship will not negatively impact the business decision and that it might even be an advantage. The correct answer is B. Disclose the personal relationship to the appropriate compliance or management personnel at Great West Lifeco and recuse oneself from further involvement in the pitch and decision-making process for this client. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it pits a potential business opportunity against a clear ethical and regulatory obligation. The pressure to secure a new client for Great West Lifeco could tempt an employee to overlook or downplay a conflict of interest, creating a significant risk for the company and its stakeholders. Careful judgment is required to navigate this situation, prioritizing integrity and compliance over short-term gains. The correct approach involves immediately disclosing the personal relationship to the appropriate compliance or management personnel within Great West Lifeco, and recusing oneself from any further involvement in the decision-making process regarding the potential client. This aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and ethical conduct expected of financial services professionals. Specifically, it upholds the regulatory framework's emphasis on transparency, avoiding conflicts of interest, and acting in the best interests of the client and the company. By disclosing, the employee ensures that Great West Lifeco can manage the conflict appropriately, preventing any perception of impropriety or undue influence. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the pitch without disclosure, hoping the personal relationship would not influence the outcome. This fails to meet regulatory requirements for conflict of interest management and breaches ethical duties of honesty and transparency. It exposes Great West Lifeco to reputational damage and potential regulatory sanctions if the conflict is discovered. Another incorrect approach would be to subtly leverage the personal relationship during the pitch to gain an advantage. This is a direct violation of ethical principles and likely contravenes specific provisions within the regulatory framework designed to prevent insider advantage or unfair competition. It undermines the integrity of the sales process and could lead to a client relationship based on favoritism rather than merit. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to avoid the potential client altogether due to the relationship, without informing management, while seemingly avoiding a conflict. This deprives Great West Lifeco of a potential business opportunity without a proper assessment of the situation, and may indicate a lack of confidence in one's ability to manage ethical challenges professionally. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of the company's code of conduct and relevant regulatory guidelines regarding conflicts of interest. When a potential conflict arises, the immediate step should be to identify the nature of the conflict, assess its materiality, and then proactively disclose it to the designated authority within the organization. This ensures that the situation is managed transparently and in accordance with established protocols, safeguarding both the individual's and the company's integrity. Question 4. Quality control measures reveal that a financial advisor at Great West Lifeco has been consistently recommending complex investment products to a specific demographic of clients, many of whom appear to have limited financial literacy. Furthermore, the advisor's personal trading activity, as observed through internal monitoring, shows a pattern of frequent, high-risk trades that seem to coincide with recommendations made to these clients. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the individual who identified these concerns? Option A. Directly confront the financial advisor to understand their rationale behind the investment recommendations and trading patterns. Option B. Immediately report the observations to the relevant financial regulatory authority without internal consultation. Option C. Document the observations thoroughly and report them to Great West Lifeco's Compliance Department for investigation. Option D. Ignore the observations, assuming the advisor is acting within their professional judgment and client best interests. The correct answer is C. Document the observations thoroughly and report them to Great West Lifeco's Compliance Department for investigation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing client confidentiality with the obligation to report potential misconduct. The core of the dilemma lies in determining the appropriate course of action when a financial advisor at Great-West Lifeco appears to be engaging in activities that could violate regulatory standards and internal policies, potentially harming clients. Careful judgment is required to avoid both overreacting and potentially damaging an employee's reputation without sufficient evidence, and underreacting, which could expose clients to risk and expose Great-West Lifeco to regulatory penalties. The correct approach involves escalating the concern through the appropriate internal channels, such as the compliance department or a designated supervisor, while respecting the advisor's right to due process. This approach upholds Great-West Lifeco's commitment to ethical conduct and client protection by initiating a formal investigation. It aligns with regulatory expectations for robust internal controls and reporting mechanisms designed to detect and prevent misconduct. By following established procedures, the company can ensure a thorough and fair review of the situation, minimizing the risk of harm to clients and maintaining regulatory compliance. An incorrect approach would be to ignore the observations, assuming they are minor or unsubstantiated. This failure to act would violate the ethical duty to protect clients and could lead to significant regulatory breaches if the advisor's actions are indeed improper. It also undermines the effectiveness of quality control measures and the company's risk management framework. Another incorrect approach would be to confront the financial advisor directly and demand an explanation without involving the appropriate internal authorities. This bypasses established procedures, could compromise a potential investigation, and may lead to an incomplete or biased assessment of the situation. It also fails to leverage the expertise of compliance professionals who are trained to handle such matters. A third incorrect approach would be to immediately report the observations to external regulatory bodies without first conducting an internal review or informing management. While whistleblowing is sometimes necessary, premature external reporting without internal escalation can be seen as circumventing internal controls and may not be the most efficient or effective way to resolve the issue, especially if the concerns can be addressed internally. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Recognizing a potential ethical or regulatory concern. 2. Consulting internal policies and procedures for reporting such concerns. 3. Escalating the matter through the designated internal channels, e.g., compliance HR supervisor. 4. Cooperating with any subsequent investigation. 5. Maintaining confidentiality throughout the process. Question 5. System analysis indicates that a long-standing and high-value client of Great-West Lifeco is expressing dissatisfaction with the performance of their current investment portfolio, which was recommended and managed by their advisor. The client is hinting at moving their substantial assets to a competitor if a quick and significant turnaround isn't achieved. The advisor suspects the client's current portfolio, while generating decent fees for Great-West Lifeco, may not be optimally aligned with the client's stated long-term goals and risk tolerance, and that alternative strategies could offer better risk-adjusted returns for the client, albeit with potentially lower immediate fees for the firm. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Great-West Lifeco advisor? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive review of the client's financial situation, risk tolerance, and objectives, and recommend the most suitable investment strategy for the client's best interest, even if it means proposing a portfolio with potentially lower immediate fees for Great-West Lifeco. Option B. Immediately propose a new, aggressive investment strategy that promises higher potential returns, aiming to impress the client and demonstrate proactive management, without a full reassessment of the client's underlying suitability for such a strategy. Option C. Advise the client that while performance can fluctuate, the current strategy is sound and aligned with their long-term objectives, while subtly emphasizing the benefits of staying with Great-West Lifeco and the potential disruption of moving assets. Option D. Inform the client that their dissatisfaction is understandable and suggest they explore options with other firms, as Great-West Lifeco cannot guarantee specific performance outcomes. The correct answer is C. Advise the client that while performance can fluctuate, the current strategy is sound and aligned with their long-term objectives, while subtly emphasizing the benefits of staying with Great-West Lifeco and the potential disruption of moving assets. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's immediate financial interests and the long-term fiduciary duty owed by an advisor. The advisor at Great West Lifeco must navigate the pressure to retain a valuable client, while upholding their ethical obligations to provide objective and suitable advice, even if it means recommending a course of action that might be less profitable for the firm in the short term. The regulatory framework governing financial advice in Canada, particularly as overseen by provincial securities commissions and industry bodies like the MFDA or EROC, depending on the advisor's registration, emphasizes suitability, client best interest, and transparency. The correct approach involves prioritizing the client's best interests above all else. This means conducting a thorough analysis of the client's financial situation, risk tolerance, and objectives, and then recommending the most suitable investment strategy, regardless of potential commission implications for the advisor or the firm. This aligns with the fundamental principles of fiduciary duty and regulatory requirements that mandate advisors act with integrity and in the client's best interest. Specifically, regulations often require advisors to understand their clients' financial needs and objectives, and to recommend products and services that are suitable for them. An incorrect approach would be to downplay the risks of the current, potentially unsuitable, investment to appease the client and retain their business. This would be a failure of the advisor's duty of care and suitability obligations. It could lead to the client suffering financial losses due to an inappropriate investment, resulting in regulatory sanctions, reputational damage, and potential legal action. Another incorrect approach would be to pressure the client into accepting a new, potentially more profitable for the firm, investment without a clear demonstration of its suitability for the client's specific circumstances. This would violate principles of fair dealing and could be construed as misrepresentation or undue influence. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of their regulatory and ethical obligations. This involves identifying potential conflicts of interest, such as the desire to retain a client's assets, and actively mitigating them. The process should involve gathering all necessary client information, performing a diligent suitability assessment, and communicating recommendations clearly and transparently, explaining both the benefits and risks. If a recommendation is not in the client's best interest, even if it means losing business, that is the ethically and regulatorily mandated path. Question 6. When evaluating a potential sale of a new investment product at Great West Lifeco, a client expresses enthusiasm for its projected returns, but seems to gloss over the details regarding its complex fee structure and potential for capital depreciation. You are aware that a competitor's product offers similar projected returns with a simpler fee structure and lower volatility. How should you proceed? Option A. Emphasize the high projected returns of the new product and assure the client that the fee structure is standard for such investments, focusing on the potential upside to secure the sale. Option B. Focus on the commission associated with the new product and encourage the client to proceed with the purchase, suggesting that the competitor's product is less lucrative for both parties. Option C. Proceed with the sale of the new product, assuming the client understands the implications of the fee structure and risk, and suggest they review the documentation at their leisure. Option D. Fully disclose the complexities of the fee structure and the potential for capital depreciation, highlighting the differences with the competitor's product, and recommend the product that best aligns with the client's stated risk tolerance and financial goals, even if it means not making the sale of the new product. The correct answer is D. Fully disclose the complexities of the fee structure and the potential for capital depreciation, highlighting the differences with the competitor's product, and recommend the product that best aligns with the client's stated risk tolerance and financial goals, even if it means not making the sale of the new product. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing client interests with regulatory obligations and internal company policies. The core conflict lies in a potential misrepresentation of a product's features to secure a sale, which could lead to client dissatisfaction, regulatory scrutiny, and reputational damage for Great West Lifeco. Careful judgment is required to uphold ethical standards and ensure compliance. The correct approach involves prioritizing transparency and accurate product representation. This means clearly communicating the limitations of the investment product, even if it means potentially losing the sale. This aligns with the fundamental ethical duty of a financial professional to act in the client's best interest and avoid misleading them. Regulatory frameworks, such as those governing financial advice and sales practices, typically mandate truthful and fair dealing, prohibiting deceptive or manipulative sales tactics. Upholding these principles protects both the client and the firm from legal and financial repercussions. An incorrect approach would be to downplay or omit information about the product's risks or limitations to secure the sale. This constitutes a misrepresentation, which is a direct violation of ethical conduct and likely breaches regulatory requirements related to disclosure and fair sales practices. Such an action erodes client trust and exposes Great West Lifeco to significant regulatory penalties, including fines and potential loss of license. Another incorrect approach would be to proceed with the sale without fully understanding the product's nuances, relying solely on the client's perceived understanding. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to meet the professional obligation to be knowledgeable about the products being offered. It also fails to proactively address potential client misunderstandings, which can lead to future disputes and regulatory complaints. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to prioritize personal commission over client suitability. This is a clear breach of fiduciary duty and ethical standards, as it places the advisor's financial gain above the client's well-being and financial objectives. Regulatory bodies universally condemn such self-serving behavior. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a clear ethical compass, a thorough understanding of product features and limitations, and a commitment to regulatory compliance. When faced with a potential conflict, professionals should ask, is this action transparent, fair, and in the client's best interest? If the answer is uncertain, seeking guidance from supervisors or compliance departments is crucial before proceeding. Prioritizing long-term client relationships and the firm's reputation over short-term gains is paramount. Question 7. Quality control measures reveal that a senior financial advisor at Great West Lifeco has been consistently recommending complex investment products to a specific group of elderly clients, without adequately documenting the suitability assessments or providing clear explanations of the associated risks and fees, as required by Great West Lifeco's internal policies and relevant financial conduct regulations. You have access to internal notes that suggest the advisor may be prioritizing higher commission products over client best interests. Option A. Confront the senior financial advisor directly with your findings, demanding an explanation for their actions and advising them to cease recommending these products to the identified clients. Option B. Document your observations internally but take no further action, assuming that the advisor is acting within their professional judgment and that the clients are aware of the risks involved. Option C. Immediately report the findings to the relevant external financial regulatory body, detailing your suspicions about the advisor's conduct and the potential harm to clients. Option D. Discreetly escalate your concerns to Great West Lifeco's compliance department and your direct supervisor, providing them with the documented evidence and requesting an internal investigation into the advisor's practices. The correct answer is C. Immediately report the findings to the relevant external financial regulatory body, detailing your suspicions about the advisor's conduct and the potential harm to clients. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing client confidentiality with the obligation to report potential misconduct that could harm clients or the financial system. The core tension lies in protecting sensitive client information while upholding regulatory integrity and preventing future harm. Careful judgment is required to determine the appropriate course of action without overstepping boundaries or failing in one's duties. The correct approach involves discreetly escalating the concern through appropriate internal channels, such as a compliance officer or legal department, while respecting the confidentiality of the client's information. This upholds professional ethics by prioritizing client trust and data security, and it adheres to regulatory frameworks that mandate reporting of suspicious activities through established procedures. This method ensures that the matter is investigated by those with the authority and expertise to act, without prematurely disclosing information or making unsubstantiated accusations. An incorrect approach of directly confronting the advisor without involving compliance or management risks breaching client confidentiality and potentially tipping off the advisor, hindering any investigation. This fails to follow established reporting protocols and could lead to disciplinary action. Another incorrect approach of ignoring the situation entirely is a clear breach of ethical duty and regulatory obligations to report potential misconduct that could jeopardize client interests or the firm's compliance. This inaction exposes the firm and its clients to significant risk. Finally, an incorrect approach of immediately reporting to external regulators without internal consultation could be premature, misinformed, and bypasses the firm's own internal control mechanisms, potentially leading to unnecessary escalation and reputational damage. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the potential ethical or regulatory breach. Next, they should consult internal policies and procedures for reporting such concerns. If unsure, seeking guidance from a supervisor, compliance officer, or legal counsel is crucial. The decision should prioritize adherence to regulatory requirements and ethical codes, ensuring that actions are proportionate, well-documented, and taken through the appropriate channels. Question 8. Analysis of a situation where a long-standing client of Great-West Lifeco, who has expressed concerns about market volatility, approaches their financial advisor requesting to liquidate a significant portion of their investment portfolio to place it in a low-yield savings account due to short-term anxiety about potential market downturns. The advisor knows that this action would likely result in substantial tax implications and would significantly hinder the client's long-term retirement goals, but the client is insistent. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Great-West Lifeco advisor? Option A. Immediately execute the client's request to liquidate the portfolio and move the funds to a savings account to alleviate their immediate anxiety and avoid potential conflict. Option B. Recommend a different investment product that offers a higher commission to the advisor, which the advisor believes might temporarily appease the client's concerns, even if it's not the most suitable long-term solution. Option C. Strongly advise the client against their request, emphasizing the advisor's expertise and the potential for market recovery, and refuse to process the transaction if the client does not change their mind. Option D. Thoroughly explain the potential negative consequences of the client's request, including tax implications and the impact on long-term goals, while also exploring alternative strategies to mitigate their anxiety and achieve their objectives, ultimately respecting the client's final decision after providing comprehensive advice. The correct answer is D. Thoroughly explain the potential negative consequences of the client's request, including tax implications and the impact on long-term goals, while also exploring alternative strategies to mitigate their anxiety and achieve their objectives, ultimately respecting the client's final decision after providing comprehensive advice. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing a client's immediate financial needs with the long-term fiduciary duty owed to them and the regulatory obligations of Great-West Lifeco. The advisor must navigate potential conflicts of interest and ensure that recommendations are solely in the client's best interest, not influenced by personal gain or pressure. Careful judgment is required to avoid misrepresentation and maintain client trust. The correct approach involves a thorough assessment of the client's financial situation, risk tolerance, and objectives, followed by a recommendation that aligns with these factors and regulatory requirements. This approach prioritizes the client's well-being and adheres to the principles of suitability and fiduciary duty, which are fundamental to financial advisory services. Specifically, it aligns with the regulatory framework governing financial advice, which mandates that advice provided must be appropriate for the client, and that any potential conflicts of interest must be disclosed and managed. An incorrect approach of immediately agreeing to the client's request without due diligence fails to uphold the advisor's fiduciary responsibility. This could lead to unsuitable investment decisions that expose the client to undue risk or fail to meet their long-term goals, potentially violating regulatory requirements related to client suitability and best interest. Another incorrect approach of pressuring the client to reconsider their decision, even if the advisor believes it is not in their best interest, can be perceived as overstepping boundaries and may not respect the client's autonomy. While the advisor has a duty to inform, the ultimate decision rests with the client, and the advisor's role is to provide informed guidance. This approach could also lead to a breakdown in the client relationship and potentially raise concerns about undue influence. A further incorrect approach of recommending a product solely because it offers a higher commission without a thorough assessment of its suitability for the client, represents a clear conflict of interest and a violation of ethical and regulatory standards. This prioritizes personal gain over the client's financial welfare. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, fully understand the client's stated needs and objectives. Second, conduct a comprehensive assessment of their financial situation, risk tolerance, and time horizon. Third, identify potential solutions that meet these criteria, considering all available products and services. Fourth, evaluate these solutions against regulatory requirements and ethical principles, particularly focusing on suitability and conflicts of interest. Fifth, present the most suitable options to the client, clearly explaining the benefits, risks, and costs of each, and disclosing any potential conflicts. Finally, document the entire process and the rationale for the recommendation. Question 9. The efficiency study reveals that Great West Lifeco could significantly reduce operational costs by streamlining client onboarding processes and consolidating customer service channels. However, the proposed changes might lead to a less personalized client experience and potentially longer wait times for certain inquiries. Which of the following approaches best navigates this situation ethically and in compliance with regulatory expectations? Option A. Implement the efficiency study's recommendations immediately to realize cost savings, with a plan to address any client complaints as they arise. Option B. Delay implementation of the efficiency study's recommendations until a comprehensive client satisfaction survey can be conducted, even if it means foregoing immediate cost savings. Option C. Prioritize cost reduction by implementing the changes that offer the most significant savings, assuming clients will adapt to the new processes. Option D. Conduct a thorough review of the proposed changes with the Compliance Department and legal counsel to assess regulatory implications and client impact before any implementation. The correct answer is A. Implement the efficiency study's recommendations immediately to realize cost savings, with a plan to address any client complaints as they arise. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's desire for efficiency and cost reduction with the fundamental ethical and regulatory obligations to clients. The pressure to implement changes quickly, driven by an efficiency study, can lead to overlooking potential negative impacts on client service and regulatory compliance. Careful judgment is required to ensure that efficiency gains do not compromise the integrity of client relationships or violate established guidelines. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the proposed changes by the Compliance Department and legal counsel before implementation. This ensures that all potential regulatory implications are identified and addressed, and that client interests are protected. Specifically, this approach aligns with the principles of client centricity and regulatory adherence, which are paramount in the financial services industry. Great West Lifeco, like all regulated entities, has a duty to act in the best interests of its clients and to comply with all applicable laws and regulations. In Canada, this would involve adhering to the mandates of the Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions, OSFI, and provincial securities regulators, as well as the ethical codes of professional bodies. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the implementation of the efficiency study's recommendations without adequate oversight from compliance and legal. This could lead to regulatory breaches, such as failing to provide adequate client disclosures or inadvertently engaging in practices that are not in the client's best interest. For instance, if the efficiency study suggests reducing the frequency of client communications or automating advice without considering individual client needs, this could violate regulatory requirements for client suitability and ongoing service. Another incorrect approach would be to prioritize cost savings over client well-being, potentially leading to a decline in service quality that could result in client complaints, reputational damage, and regulatory scrutiny. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve a structured risk assessment. This includes identifying potential risks, regulatory, ethical, reputational, operational, evaluating their likelihood and impact, and developing mitigation strategies. Before any significant operational change is implemented, a comprehensive review by all relevant departments, including compliance, legal, and risk management, is essential. This collaborative approach ensures that all perspectives are considered and that decisions are made in accordance with regulatory requirements and ethical standards, safeguarding both the company and its clients. Question 10. Stakeholder feedback indicates a potential discrepancy in recent sales data that, if unaddressed, could lead to an overstatement of performance metrics for Great West Lifeco. Your team is under pressure to meet quarterly targets. What is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Initiate a thorough internal investigation to understand the nature and extent of the data discrepancy, and then take corrective action as necessary. Option B. Instruct the team to adjust the data to align with the expected performance targets to avoid negative stakeholder perception. Option C. Immediately report the potential discrepancy to regulatory bodies without conducting an initial internal review. Option D. Downplay the discrepancy and monitor it closely, hoping it resolves itself in the next reporting period. The correct answer is A. Initiate a thorough internal investigation to understand the nature and extent of the data discrepancy, and then take corrective action as necessary. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's immediate financial interests with its long-term ethical obligations and regulatory compliance. The pressure to meet targets can create a conflict of interest, or the temptation to overlook potential issues for short-term gain is present. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all actions align with Great West Lifeco's commitment to integrity and regulatory standards. The correct approach involves proactively addressing the identified data discrepancy by initiating a thorough internal investigation. This demonstrates a commitment to accuracy, transparency, and regulatory adherence. Specifically, it aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and the regulatory expectation that financial reporting is accurate and reliable. By investigating and rectifying the issue, Great West Lifeco upholds its duty to stakeholders and avoids potential regulatory penalties or reputational damage. An incorrect approach that involves downplaying the discrepancy and hoping it resolves itself is ethically flawed because it constitutes a willful disregard for potential inaccuracies in financial reporting. This could violate principles of due diligence and fiduciary responsibility. Furthermore, it risks non-compliance with reporting requirements, potentially leading to regulatory sanctions. Another incorrect approach, which is to immediately disclose the potential issue to regulators without a preliminary internal assessment, might seem transparent but could be premature and create unnecessary alarm. While transparency is important, a responsible organization first attempts to understand the scope and nature of an issue internally. This approach could also be seen as lacking in due diligence and potentially damaging to the company's reputation if the issue turns out to be minor or easily resolvable. A final incorrect approach, which is to instruct the team to adjust the data to fit the expected outcome, is a severe ethical and regulatory breach. This constitutes data manipulation and misrepresentation, directly violating principles of honesty, integrity, and accurate financial reporting. Such an action would expose Great West Lifeco to significant legal and regulatory consequences, including fines, sanctions, and severe reputational damage. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes ethical conduct and regulatory compliance. This involves 1. Identifying the issue and its potential implications. 2. Consulting relevant internal policies and external regulations. 3. Gathering facts and conducting a thorough investigation. 4. Evaluating potential courses of action based on ethical principles and regulatory requirements. 5. Selecting the most responsible and compliant path, which often involves proactive internal resolution and, if necessary, appropriate disclosure. Question 11. Research into a potential new investment product being considered for recommendation by Great West Lifeco has revealed that the product is managed by a firm where a close family member of the financial advisor holds a senior management position. The advisor believes the product is genuinely suitable for the client, but is aware of the family connection. Option A. Ignore the family relationship and proceed with the recommendation, as the primary focus should be on the client's best interests and the product's suitability. Option B. Proceed with recommending the investment product to the client, assuming the family connection is not significant enough to influence professional judgment. Option C. Discuss the family relationship with the client first and then decide whether to disclose it internally. Option D. Disclose the family relationship to Great West Lifeco's compliance department and seek guidance on how to proceed before making any recommendation to the client. The correct answer is D. Disclose the family relationship to Great West Lifeco's compliance department and seek guidance on how to proceed before making any recommendation to the client. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing client interests with regulatory obligations and internal company policies. The core of the dilemma lies in identifying potential conflicts of interest and ensuring that Great West Lifeco's commitment to its clients is not compromised by personal gain or undisclosed relationships. Careful judgment is required to navigate these complexities ethically and legally. The correct approach involves proactively disclosing the potential conflict of interest to the relevant internal compliance department and seeking guidance before proceeding. This demonstrates a commitment to transparency, adherence to regulatory frameworks governing financial advice and disclosure, and upholds Great West Lifeco's ethical standards. By seeking internal review, the individual ensures that any potential conflict is managed appropriately, protecting both the client and the company from regulatory breaches and reputational damage. This aligns with principles of fiduciary duty and the need for robust internal controls in financial services. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the recommendation without disclosure, assuming the relationship is insignificant or that it won't influence the advice. This fails to acknowledge the potential for even indirect influence and violates the spirit and letter of disclosure requirements designed to prevent conflicts of interest. It could lead to regulatory sanctions, loss of client trust, and damage to Great West Lifeco's reputation. Another incorrect approach would be to discuss the situation with the client first without consulting internal compliance. While client communication is important, the primary obligation in managing potential conflicts of interest, especially those involving personal relationships that could influence professional judgment, is to follow established internal procedures and regulatory guidelines for disclosure and management of such conflicts. This bypasses the company's established risk management framework. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to dismiss the relationship as irrelevant and make the recommendation without any consideration of its potential impact. This demonstrates a lack of awareness of ethical obligations and regulatory expectations regarding conflicts of interest, which are designed to ensure objective advice and protect consumers. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency, adherence to regulatory requirements, and internal policy. This involves identifying potential conflicts, understanding the relevant disclosure obligations, consulting with compliance departments, and documenting all decisions and actions taken. The guiding principle should always be to act in the best interest of the client, while upholding the integrity of the financial services industry and the reputation of Great West Lifeco. Question 12. Quality control measures reveal that a senior financial advisor at Great West Lifeco has been consistently recommending a particular investment product to a wide range of clients, despite recent internal research highlighting significant risks associated with this product that were not fully disclosed to clients in the advisor's presentations. You, as a junior advisor, have observed this pattern and have concerns about the advisor's disclosure practices. Option A. Directly approach the senior advisor to discuss your concerns about their recommendations and disclosure practices. Option B. Ignore the situation, assuming the senior advisor is acting within their professional judgment and that internal research may not be definitive. Option C. Discuss your observations with other colleagues in the firm to gauge their opinions and decide on a course of action together. Option D. Report your concerns immediately to the Great West Lifeco Compliance Department, providing specific examples of the advisor's recommendations and your observations regarding the disclosure of risks. The correct answer is D. Report your concerns immediately to the Great West Lifeco Compliance Department, providing specific examples of the advisor's recommendations and your observations regarding the disclosure of risks. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing client confidentiality with the obligation to report potential misconduct that could impact the integrity of financial advice provided by Great West Lifeco. The advisor's actions, if not handled appropriately, could lead to regulatory sanctions, reputational damage for the firm, and harm to clients. Careful judgment is required to navigate the ethical tightrope between loyalty to a colleague and adherence to professional standards and regulatory requirements. Correct approach involves discreetly escalating the concern through appropriate internal channels, such as a compliance department or a designated supervisor, without directly confronting the colleague or making assumptions about their intent. This upholds professional integrity by ensuring that potential breaches are investigated by those with the authority and expertise to do so, in accordance with Great West Lifeco's internal policies and relevant regulatory frameworks. This approach prioritizes a thorough and impartial review, protecting both the firm and its clients from potential harm, while also respecting due process for the colleague. An incorrect approach would be to ignore the situation, as this fails to address potential client harm and regulatory noncompliance, exposing Great West Lifeco to significant risk. Another incorrect approach is to directly confront the colleague. This bypasses established reporting procedures, could lead to a defensive reaction, and might compromise any subsequent investigation by tipping off the individual. Furthermore, it places the advisor in a position of judgment and enforcement that is not their role. A third incorrect approach is to discuss the situation with other colleagues. This constitutes a breach of confidentiality and could be construed as gossip or an attempt to build consensus for action, rather than following the proper reporting channels, thereby undermining the integrity of the investigation process. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to company policy and regulatory obligations. This involves recognizing potential ethical conflicts, consulting relevant internal policies and codes of conduct, and escalating concerns through designated reporting lines. The focus should always be on objective assessment and impartial reporting, rather than personal judgment or informal resolution. Question 13. Comparative studies suggest that financial advisors often face situations where a product offering a significantly higher commission also appears to meet a client's stated financial goals. As a Great West Lifeco advisor, you have identified two investment products that could potentially fulfill a client's objective of long-term growth. Product A offers a modest commission, while Product B, which is slightly more complex and carries a higher risk profile, offers a substantially higher commission. The client has expressed a general interest in growth but has not delved into specific risk tolerance details. How should you proceed? Option A. Recommend Product A without mentioning the commission difference, or Product B, as it is the safer option and avoids potential client confusion about commission structures. Option B. Recommend Product B, focusing solely on its growth potential and downplaying the commission difference and the higher risk, as the client expressed interest in growth. Option C. Recommend Product A, explaining that while the commission is lower, it aligns better with a prudent approach to long-term growth and allows for a more thorough discussion of the client's risk tolerance before considering more complex options. Option D. Recommend Product B, highlighting its potential for higher growth and the greater commission you would receive, while also mentioning the slightly higher risk. The correct answer is D. Recommend Product B, highlighting its potential for higher growth and the greater commission you would receive, while also mentioning the slightly higher risk. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's immediate financial interests and the long-term fiduciary duty owed by a Great West Lifeco advisor. The advisor must navigate the temptation to prioritize a lucrative commission over the client's true needs, which could lead to unsuitable product recommendations. Careful judgment is required to uphold ethical standards and regulatory compliance. The correct approach involves prioritizing the client's best interests above all else, even if it means foregoing a higher commission. This aligns with the fundamental principles of fiduciary duty, which mandate that an advisor must act with utmost good faith and loyalty towards their client. Specifically, under the regulatory framework governing financial advice in Canada, which Great West Lifeco operates within, advisors are expected to conduct thorough suitability assessments, understand client objectives, risk tolerance, and financial situation, and recommend products that are appropriate for those circumstances. Recommending a product solely based on commission potential, without regard for suitability, would violate these principles and potentially contravene regulations related to fair dealing and client protection. An incorrect approach would be to recommend the higher commission product without a comprehensive suitability assessment, solely because it offers a greater payout. This action would represent a breach of fiduciary duty and a failure to act in the client's best interest. It could also violate regulations requiring advisors to disclose conflicts of interest and to ensure that recommendations are suitable. Another incorrect approach would be to disclose the commission difference, but then proceed with the higher commission product recommendation, without adequately explaining the implications for the client's financial goals or without exploring alternatives that might be more suitable but offer lower commissions. This approach, while appearing transparent, still prioritizes the advisor's gain over the client's welfare and fails to meet the standard of providing advice solely in the client's best interest. A further incorrect approach would be to avoid the conversation altogether and simply recommend the product that the client initially expressed interest in, even if the advisor knows a more suitable, lower commission option exists. This passive approach fails to exercise professional judgment and fulfill the advisor's duty to guide the client towards the most appropriate financial solutions. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear hierarchy of priorities. 1. Client's best interests and suitability. 2. Regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. 3. Business objectives and personal compensation. An advisor should always begin by thoroughly understanding the client's needs and objectives. Then they should identify all suitable product options, considering their features, benefits, risks, and costs, including commission structures. Any potential conflicts of interest, such as higher commissions on certain products, must be fully disclosed and managed appropriately. The final recommendation should be the product that best serves the client's interests, irrespective of the commission earned by the advisor. Question 14. Quality control measures reveal that a financial advisor at Great West Lifeco has received a request from a long-standing client to invest a significant portion of their portfolio into a highly speculative, illiquid asset class that the advisor believes is not suitable for the client's stated risk tolerance and financial goals. The client is insistent on proceeding due to recent media hype surrounding this asset class. Which of the following approaches best reflects the professional and regulatory obligations of the financial advisor in Great West Lifeco? Option A. Agree to the investment but advise the client to sign a waiver acknowledging the high risk, thereby absolving Great West Lifeco of any future liability. Option B. Explain to the client in detail the risks associated with the proposed investment, its illiquidity, and why it does not align with their established financial plan and risk profile. Offer alternative, suitable investment options that could potentially meet their underlying objectives while remaining within regulatory guidelines and their risk tolerance. Option C. Inform the client that the investment is too risky and refuse to process the request without further explanation or offering alternatives. Option D. Proceed with the investment as requested by the client to maintain client satisfaction, assuming the client understands the risks involved and is willing to accept them. The correct answer is B. Explain to the client in detail the risks associated with the proposed investment, its illiquidity, and why it does not align with their established financial plan and risk profile. Offer alternative, suitable investment options that could potentially meet their underlying objectives while remaining within regulatory guidelines and their risk tolerance. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it involves a potential conflict between a client's immediate desires and the fiduciary duty owed to them, as well as potential regulatory breaches. The advisor must navigate this delicate situation with integrity, ensuring that Great West Lifeco's commitment to client well-being and regulatory compliance is upheld. Careful judgment is required to balance client satisfaction with ethical obligations and legal requirements. The correct approach involves a transparent and educational discussion with the client. This approach prioritizes the client's long-term financial health and adherence to regulatory guidelines. By explaining the risks and benefits of the proposed investment in the context of the client's overall financial plan and risk tolerance, the advisor upholds their fiduciary duty. This aligns with the principles of acting in the client's best interest and providing suitable advice, which are fundamental to regulatory frameworks governing financial advice. Specifically, this would involve adhering to principles of know your client, KIC, and suitability, ensuring that any recommendation is appropriate for the client's circumstances and objectives. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the investment without a thorough discussion of the risks. This fails to meet the regulatory requirement of ensuring suitability and acting in the client's best interest. It could lead to significant client losses and potential regulatory sanctions against both the advisor and Great West Lifeco for failing to conduct adequate due diligence and provide appropriate advice. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the client's request outright without exploring the underlying reasons or offering alternative solutions. While the initial request might be unsuitable, a complete dismissal can damage the client relationship and miss an opportunity to educate the client and potentially find a more appropriate investment that meets their underlying needs. This demonstrates a lack of client centricity and potentially a failure to explore all avenues to serve the client's interests within regulatory boundaries. A third incorrect approach would be to agree to the investment solely to appease the client, despite recognizing its unsuitability. This is a direct violation of fiduciary duty and regulatory requirements. It prioritizes short-term client appeasement over long-term client welfare and exposes Great West Lifeco to significant reputational and legal risks. The professional decision-making process should involve a structured approach. First, understanding the client's request and the rationale behind it. Second, assessing the suitability of the proposed investment against regulatory requirements and the client's profile. Third, if the investment is unsuitable, clearly and empathetically explaining the reasons to the client, referencing relevant risks and regulatory principles. Fourth, exploring alternative solutions that might meet the client's underlying objectives. And finally, documenting the entire process and the rationale for any decision made. Question 15. Regulatory review indicates that a long-standing and high-value client of Great West Lifeco is requesting a specific investment strategy that, while potentially lucrative in the short term, appears to push the boundaries of current regulatory guidelines regarding suitability and risk disclosure. The client is insistent, citing their past success with similar, though less regulated, approaches. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Great West Lifeco representative? Option A. Clearly explain to the client the regulatory limitations and the reasons why the requested strategy cannot be implemented, while proactively offering alternative compliance strategies that align with their stated financial goals and risk tolerance. Option B. Proceed with the client's requested strategy, assuming their experience and insistence outweigh the nuanced interpretation of current regulatory guidelines, and document the client's explicit instruction. Option C. Advise the client that, while the strategy is not ideal from a regulatory perspective, it can be implemented with minor adjustments that still satisfy the spirit of the regulation, even if not the letter. Option D. Inform the client that the requested strategy is not permissible and suggest they seek advice from an independent advisor who may be able to facilitate their preferred approach outside of Great West Lifeco's purview. The correct answer is A. Clearly explain to the client the regulatory limitations and the reasons why the requested strategy cannot be implemented, while proactively offering alternative compliance strategies that align with their stated financial goals and risk tolerance. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's immediate financial desires and the long-term regulatory obligations of Great West Lifeco. The pressure to retain a valuable client can create an ethical tension, requiring careful judgment to uphold professional integrity and compliance. The correct approach involves prioritizing regulatory compliance and client best interests over short-term revenue. This means clearly explaining to the client the limitations imposed by the regulatory framework and offering alternative compliance solutions. This upholds Great West Lifeco's commitment to ethical conduct and regulatory adherence, safeguarding both the company and the client from potential future repercussions. An incorrect approach that involves circumventing or misinterpreting the regulatory framework to accommodate the client's request would be a serious ethical and regulatory failure. This could lead to penalties, reputational damage, and a breach of trust. Another incorrect approach, such as pressuring the client to accept a less suitable but compliant option without fully exploring their needs, fails to demonstrate a client-centric approach and could damage the client relationship. Finally, ignoring the regulatory concern altogether and proceeding with the client's request would be a direct violation of compliance duties and a severe dereliction of professional responsibility. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the core ethical and regulatory issues. This involves understanding the relevant laws and guidelines thoroughly. Next, they should assess the potential consequences of various actions, considering both immediate and long-term impacts on the client, the company, and regulatory standing. Open and honest communication with the client, explaining the rationale behind decisions, is crucial. If uncertainty exists, seeking guidance from compliance departments or legal counsel is a responsible step. The ultimate goal is to find a solution that aligns with both client needs and regulatory requirements, even if it means not fulfilling the client's initial request directly. Question 16. Consider a scenario where you are a financial advisor at Great-West Lifeco and you are recommending an investment product to a client. You discover that the client's adult child is a senior executive at the company that underwrites this specific investment product. You believe the product is genuinely the best option for your client based on their financial goals and risk tolerance, and you have no personal financial incentive tied to this particular product. However, you recognize that this personal connection could be perceived as a conflict of interest. What is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Immediately disclose the client's child's relationship with the underwriting company to your supervisor and the compliance department, and await their guidance before proceeding with the recommendation. Option B. Delay disclosing the relationship until after the client has made a decision on the investment, to avoid potentially influencing their choice prematurely. Option C. Inform the client that their child works for the underwriting company, but proceed with the recommendation as you are confident in its suitability. Option D. Proceed with the recommendation as planned, as your professional judgment is sound and the personal relationship does not influence your decision. The correct answer is A. Immediately disclose the client's child's relationship with the underwriting company to your supervisor and the compliance department, and await their guidance before proceeding with the recommendation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing client interests with regulatory obligations and the company's ethical standards. The core of the dilemma lies in potential conflicts of interest and the duty to act in the best interests of the client, while adhering to Great-West Lifeco's internal policies and relevant Canadian financial services regulations. Careful judgment is required to navigate these competing demands without compromising professional integrity or regulatory compliance. The correct approach involves prioritizing transparency and seeking guidance from appropriate internal channels. This means immediately disclosing the potential conflict of interest to a supervisor or compliance department. This action demonstrates a commitment to ethical conduct and regulatory adherence by proactively addressing a situation that could lead to a breach of trust or regulatory noncompliance. Canadian financial services regulations, such as those overseen by provincial securities commissions and the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada, FCAC, emphasize the importance of acting in the client's best interest and avoiding conflicts of interest. Great-West Lifeco's internal policies would further reinforce these principles, likely mandating disclosure and seeking approval for any situation that could be perceived as a conflict. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the recommendation without disclosure. This fails to acknowledge the potential for bias, even if unintentional, and violates the duty to act in the client's best interest. It also contravenes regulatory expectations for disclosure of conflicts, which are designed to protect consumers. Such an action could lead to regulatory sanctions, reputational damage for both the individual and Great-West Lifeco, and a loss of client trust. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the personal relationship as irrelevant and proceed with the recommendation based solely on professional judgment. While professional judgment is crucial, it does not negate the need for disclosure when a personal relationship could reasonably be perceived to influence that judgment. Canadian regulators expect financial professionals to be vigilant about potential conflicts arising from personal relationships and to take appropriate steps to mitigate them, which typically includes disclosure. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to delay disclosure until after the recommendation has been made and accepted. This creates a situation where the client is not fully informed at the time of decision-making, and it suggests an attempt to circumvent the disclosure process. This undermines the principle of informed consent and can be viewed as a deliberate attempt to conceal a potential conflict, leading to severe ethical and regulatory repercussions. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with identifying potential conflicts of interest, no matter how minor they may seem. This involves self-awareness and a thorough understanding of regulatory requirements and company policies. The next step is to proactively disclose any identified conflict to the appropriate internal authority, such as a supervisor or compliance officer. This disclosure should be clear, concise, and provide all necessary details for the authority to assess the situation. Following their guidance and obtaining explicit approval before proceeding is paramount. This systematic approach ensures that client interests are protected, regulatory obligations are met, and the firm's ethical standards are upheld. Question 17. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of operational inefficiencies within Great West Lifeco's client onboarding process, with a high potential impact on client satisfaction and regulatory reporting accuracy. To address this, a proposal is put forward to streamline data verification steps by relying more heavily on automated checks with less manual oversight. Which of the following approaches best balances process optimization with regulatory and ethical considerations for Great West Lifeco? Option A. Defer the process optimization until a new, fully compliant automated system can be procured, even if it means significant delays and continued operational inefficiencies. Option B. Implement the automated checks with reduced manual oversight immediately to realize efficiency gains and address any compliance issues that arise retrospectively. Option C. Increase the workload on existing manual verification teams to compensate for the perceived inefficiencies without altering the automated processes. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive review of the proposed automated checks, including a detailed assessment of their accuracy against regulatory requirements and potential impact on data privacy, before phased implementation with ongoing monitoring. The correct answer is B. Implement the automated checks with reduced manual oversight immediately to realize efficiency gains and address any compliance issues that arise retrospectively. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires Great West Lifeco to balance the efficiency gains from process optimization with the imperative to maintain regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. The pressure to improve operational performance can sometimes lead to shortcuts or overlooking critical controls, which could have significant consequences. Careful judgment is required to ensure that optimization efforts do not inadvertently create new risks or violate established guidelines. The correct approach involves a thorough review and documentation of all proposed process changes, ensuring they align with Great West Lifeco's internal policies and relevant regulatory frameworks. This includes assessing the impact of any changes on data privacy, customer protection, and financial reporting accuracy. Regulatory justification stems from the fundamental duty of care owed to clients and the obligation to operate within the bounds of applicable laws and regulations, such as those governing financial services and data handling. Ethical justification lies in transparency, fairness, and ensuring that efficiency does not come at the expense of client well-being or data security. An incorrect approach that prioritizes speed over thoroughness would fail to identify potential compliance gaps. This could lead to violations of data protection regulations, resulting in fines and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without considering the impact on service quality or regulatory adherence would be ethically unsound and potentially non-compliant, as it could lead to a degradation of services that clients rely on or inadvertently breach consumer protection laws. A third incorrect approach that implements changes without proper stakeholder consultation, including compliance and legal teams, risks overlooking critical regulatory requirements or internal control weaknesses, thereby exposing Great West Lifeco to undue risk. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the objectives of process optimization. This framework should then incorporate a risk assessment phase, identifying potential regulatory, operational, and ethical risks associated with proposed changes. Subsequently, a due diligence phase should involve consulting with relevant stakeholders, including legal, compliance, and operational teams, to ensure all implications are understood. Finally, a robust implementation and monitoring plan should be established to track the effectiveness of the optimized processes and ensure ongoing compliance. Question 18. The investigation demonstrates that Great West Lifeco's current client onboarding process is time-consuming and resource-intensive. To improve efficiency, a proposal has been made to streamline data collection by centralizing client information into a single, less secure database accessible by a wider range of employees. This proposal aims to reduce processing time significantly. Which of the following approaches best aligns with Great West Lifeco's regulatory obligations and professional best practices for process optimization? Option A. Implement a phased approach to process optimization, starting with a thorough privacy impact assessment of the proposed changes, followed by the development of new, secure data handling protocols that integrate privacy by design principles, and comprehensive employee training on these new protocols before full implementation. Option B. Outsource the entire client onboarding process to a third-party vendor without conducting due diligence on their data security and privacy practices, relying on their stated compliance to meet Great West Lifeco's obligations. Option C. Adopt the proposed database solution without modification, assuming that existing general data security measures will adequately protect client information, and focus solely on the speed of implementation to realize cost savings. Option D. Proceed with centralizing client information into the proposed database immediately to achieve rapid efficiency gains, with a plan to address any potential privacy concerns retrospectively once the new process is operational. The correct answer is A. Implement a phased approach to process optimization, starting with a thorough privacy impact assessment of the proposed changes, followed by the development of new, secure data handling protocols that integrate privacy by design principles, and comprehensive employee training on these new protocols before full implementation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Great West Lifeco, as a regulated financial institution, must balance the need for operational efficiency with its stringent obligations to protect client data and adhere to privacy regulations. The pressure to optimize processes, while beneficial for business, can inadvertently create vulnerabilities if not managed with a deep understanding of compliance requirements. Careful judgment is required to ensure that efficiency gains do not compromise the integrity of client information or violate regulatory mandates. The correct approach involves a comprehensive review and redesign of the data handling processes, explicitly incorporating privacy by design principles and ensuring adherence to all relevant Canadian privacy legislation, such as PIPEDA, Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act, and provincial equivalents where applicable. This approach is best professional practice because it proactively embeds regulatory compliance into the operational framework. It demonstrates a commitment to data protection, builds client trust, and mitigates the risk of significant regulatory penalties and reputational damage. By prioritizing privacy and security from the outset of process optimization, Great West Lifeco aligns its business objectives with its legal and ethical responsibilities. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without a thorough privacy impact assessment would fail to identify potential data exposure risks. This could lead to breaches of client confidentiality, violating the core principles of PIPEDA, and potentially resulting in substantial fines and legal action. Another incorrect approach that involves implementing new technologies without adequate staff training on data handling protocols creates a significant risk of human error, leading to inadvertent data disclosure and noncompliance. Furthermore, an approach that bypasses established data governance policies in the name of speed would undermine the company's internal control environment and expose it to regulatory scrutiny for failing to follow its own documented procedures, which are often designed to ensure compliance. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the regulatory landscape. This involves identifying all applicable privacy laws and guidelines. Next, a thorough risk assessment, including a privacy impact assessment, should be conducted for any proposed process changes. This assessment should evaluate potential data protection vulnerabilities and their likelihood and impact. Solutions should then be developed that not only achieve the desired operational improvements, but also demonstrably meet or exceed regulatory requirements. Finally, ongoing monitoring and auditing are crucial to ensure continued compliance and adapt to evolving regulations and threats. Question 19. The analysis reveals that Great West Lifeco is exploring opportunities to optimize its client onboarding process to reduce turnaround times and enhance operational efficiency. A proposed initiative involves leveraging new technology that automates data verification and client communication. However, concerns have been raised regarding the potential impact on data privacy and the accuracy of automated client disclosures. Which approach best balances the goals of process optimization with the imperative of regulatory compliance and ethical client treatment? Option A. Prioritize cost savings by selecting the most affordable technological solution, assuming that standard industry practices will inherently meet regulatory requirements. Option B. Implement the new technology immediately to gain a competitive advantage, with a plan to address any compliance issues that arise post-implementation. Option C. Automate as much of the onboarding process as possible to maximize efficiency, deferring detailed review of client communication content to a later stage. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment of the new technology, focusing on data security, privacy compliance, and the accuracy and adequacy of automated client disclosures before proceeding with implementation. The correct answer is B. Implement the new technology immediately to gain a competitive advantage, with a plan to address any compliance issues that arise post-implementation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Great West Lifeco employees by requiring them to balance the pursuit of process optimization with strict adherence to regulatory requirements and ethical conduct. The challenge lies in identifying improvements that enhance efficiency without compromising client data security, privacy, or fair treatment, all of which are paramount under relevant financial services regulations. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any proposed optimization does not inadvertently create new risks or violate existing compliance obligations. The correct approach involves a thorough review of existing processes to identify inefficiencies and potential bottlenecks, followed by the development of solutions that are demonstrably compliant with all applicable Great West Lifeco policies and regulatory frameworks. This approach prioritizes a risk-based assessment, ensuring that any proposed changes are vetted for their impact on compliance, data integrity, and client outcomes. Regulatory justification stems from the fundamental duty of care owed to clients and the obligation to operate within the bounds of financial services law, which mandates robust internal controls and data protection measures. Ethical justification is rooted in maintaining client trust and ensuring fair and transparent business practices. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on speed or cost reduction without considering regulatory implications would fail to uphold the duty of care. For instance, implementing a new system that streamlines data entry but lacks adequate security protocols would violate data protection regulations and expose client information to unauthorized access, leading to significant legal and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach might involve automating client communication without ensuring that the automated messages are personalized, accurate, and compliant with disclosure requirements, potentially misleading clients or failing to provide necessary information, which contravenes principles of fair dealing and consumer protection. A third incorrect approach could be to bypass established internal approval processes for system changes, even if the changes appear beneficial, as this undermines governance and control frameworks, increasing the risk of unintended consequences and noncompliance. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the regulatory landscape and internal policies governing their operations. When considering process optimization, they must proactively identify potential compliance risks and ethical considerations. This involves consulting with compliance departments, legal counsel, and risk management teams to ensure that proposed changes are thoroughly evaluated. A structured approach, such as a formal change management process that includes impact assessments, risk mitigation strategies, and post-implementation reviews, is crucial for making informed decisions that align operational efficiency with regulatory and ethical imperatives. Question 20. Process analysis reveals that a proposed automation of client onboarding at Great West Lifeco could significantly reduce processing times and associated labor costs. However, the automation involves a new system that aggregates client data from various internal sources and uses algorithms to determine initial product suitability. The project team is eager to implement this quickly to realize cost savings. What is the most appropriate approach for Great West Lifeco to take? Option A. Prioritize the speed of implementation to capture immediate cost savings, with a plan to address any potential regulatory issues that may arise post-implementation through reactive measures. Option B. Conduct a thorough review of the proposed automation against all relevant Canadian federal and provincial privacy legislation, e.g., PIPEDA, provincial equivalents, and financial services regulations, including an assessment of algorithmic bias and data handling protocols before any implementation. Option C. Outsource the entire client onboarding process to a third-party vendor that specializes in automation without conducting an in-depth assessment of the vendor's compliance framework with Canadian regulations. Option D. Proceed with the implementation as planned, focusing on the efficiency gains and assuming the new system's algorithms are inherently compliant with Canadian financial services regulations and privacy laws. The correct answer is D. Proceed with the implementation as planned, focusing on the efficiency gains and assuming the new system's algorithms are inherently compliant with Canadian financial services regulations and privacy laws. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Great-West Lifeco, as a financial services provider, operates under strict regulatory oversight in Canada, primarily governed by the Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions (OSFI) and provincial securities regulators. The core challenge lies in balancing the pursuit of operational efficiency with the non-negotiable requirement of maintaining client trust and adhering to regulatory mandates concerning data privacy and fair treatment of customers. Misinterpreting or inadequately addressing process optimization can lead to significant compliance breaches, reputational damage, and financial penalties. The correct approach involves a comprehensive review that prioritizes regulatory compliance and client impact assessment alongside efficiency gains. This means any proposed process changes must first undergo a thorough vetting against relevant Canadian privacy legislation, e.g., PIPEDA, provincial equivalents, and financial services regulations. Client data handling, consent mechanisms, and the potential for discriminatory outcomes must be meticulously examined. The ethical imperative is to ensure that efficiency does not come at the expense of client rights or regulatory integrity. This approach upholds the principles of accountability and transparency expected of financial institutions. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on cost reduction without considering regulatory implications would fail to identify risks associated with data handling or client communication. For instance, automating client communication without ensuring compliance with disclosure requirements or data protection protocols could lead to breaches of PIPEDA or provincial privacy laws. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes speed of implementation over thorough risk assessment might overlook potential biases introduced by new algorithms or systems, violating principles of fair treatment and potentially leading to discriminatory practices, which are prohibited under various Canadian human rights and consumer protection laws. A third incorrect approach that involves outsourcing critical client-facing processes without adequate due diligence on the vendor's compliance framework could expose Great-West Lifeco to significant regulatory scrutiny and liability if the vendor fails to meet Canadian standards. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying all applicable regulatory requirements. This is followed by a risk assessment that considers both operational and compliance risks associated with any proposed change. Stakeholder consultation, including legal and compliance departments, is crucial. Finally, a pilot testing phase with robust monitoring and evaluation against both efficiency metrics and compliance standards should precede full implementation.